Chapter 36, Elective 2. Thank you for your help. After expressing his gratitude, Rin directly left the classroom. Staring at the departing figure of the student who he had just helped for a brief moment, Kevin turned around and returned to his seat. Taking out his bag, Kevin packed up his stuff. Just as he was about to finish packing up, a handsome individual whose looks rivaled that of a top celebrity calmly looked down on him. "What did you do that for?" "What do you mean?" Tilting his head, Kevin questioningly looked at Jean. "Why are you helping a pathetic loser like him?" Frowning at Jin's choice of words, Kevin secretly shook his head and responded. "Picking on someone weaker than you is more pathetic in my opinion." "Humph, you should already how the world works by now." Snorting at Kevin's comment in disdain, Jean turned around and went towards Arnold, who was sitting 2 rows ahead of Kevin. "Don't waste your time on helping losers like him. It's beneath you. Just ignore him." Just as Kevin was about to rebuke him, a beautiful voice entered his ears, prompting him to turn his head around. With her short brown hair accompanied by her porcelain white skin, Emma stood there looking up at Kevin, who was half a head taller than her. "He's an idiot, so ignore him." "But..." "Just leave it at that, he's just gonna ignore whatever you say anyway, so there's no point in arguing with him." Turning around, Emma left towards the exit of the classroom. "You coming?" "Yes." Sighing, Kevin took his bag and followed Emma out of the classroom. Since he was still not used to this place, Kevin had asked Emma to guide him during the elective fair. Catching up to her, Kevin walked side by side with Emma. Normally, a person would have been extremely happy to walk next to such a beautiful girl, but it was extremely uncomfortable to Kevin, who was not used to this much attention. Since his parents' death, Kevin preferred staying out of people's sight, hence why he was not used to the stares. But unbeknownst to him, they weren't just looking at Emma, but at him too. His looks, which rivaled Jin's, perfectly matched Emma's breathtaking beauty, making everyone who saw them walking together sigh in admiration. "You'll get used to it." "Huh, excuse me?" "I mean you'll get used to stares soon enough." "Oh. Okay, but why do I need to get used to the stares? Aren't they just staring at you?" Shaking her head as if she was looking at an idiot, Emma picked up her pace. "Sigh, whatever, do you have an elective you want to join in mind?" "Not really, I was thinking of joining some sort of combat-related elective, since from what I've seen there isn't anything in particular that attracts my attention." Cocking her head to the side to better hear what Kevin was saying, Emma's auburn hair, which was moderately short, lightly rested on top of her shoulders, muting the azure blue uniform. Hearing Kevin's response, Emma couldn't help but roll her eyes as she pinched the middle of her brows. "Is all you do training?" "Not really, I just thought that any other elective would have been a waste of time." "Well, I don't think it's my place to say what you should choose and what you shouldn't, but I do urge you to think about it more thoroughly." "Will do." Stopping, Emma's eyes narrowed. Turning around, she looked back at Kevin with a serious expression and spoke. "No, I don't think you do." Noticing Emma's behavior and expression, Kevin's back unconsciously straightened as he listened attentively. "Electives have a much deeper meaning than you think, especially for someone as talented as you. If you just randomly choose an elective and it happens to be under a faction, even if you don't plan on entering the faction, they will still consider you as a part of them. Especially since it's you. Moreover, once you join a faction, you will officially be an enemy of all other factions that are against the faction which you are a part of. Keep in mind that once you entered a faction, even if you didn't mean to, if you wish to exit, you must prepare yourself to make an enemy of that faction." Hearing Emma's explanation, Kevin became dumbfounded as cold sweat dripped from his back. All of this just for joining an elective? Poking Kevin's chest with her finger, Emma looked at Kevin seriously. "Yes, so don't just carelessly join an elective." Repeatedly nodding his head, Kevin promised Emma to be careful when selecting an elective. Seeing her turn around, although Kevin didn't show it, he was extremely thankful to Emma, who chose to help him out of her own volition. Kevin already knew that Emma had already chosen her elective, and was just doing him a favor. Although they had only known each other for about 3 weeks, Kevin already considered Emma a good friend. They first met when entering their boarding apartments. It was also at the same time he met Jean, Amanda, and Melissa. Since they were in the same building, they had no choice but to interact with each other, and from there they had gotten along with each other well. Well, there were a couple of ups and downs in the beginning as Jean displayed obvious hostility against Kevin. Looking back at the previous events, Kevin had a hunch it had something to do with Melissa, as Jean's hostility would shoot up a notch whenever he interacted with her, but he didn't want to pry too deeply. Thus as such, because of Jean, the atmosphere in the dorm was quite tense. But fortunately, thanks to Emma, who got along with everyone, the awkward atmosphere dissipated and everyone managed to get along with each other. It could be said that Emma was the key that linked everyone in the dorm. If it weren't for her, who knows if Kevin would have even bothered talking to Jean. Hey, you listening? Snapping him out of his thoughts was the figure of Emma, who had stopped walking and was looking at him with an annoyed pout. Cute, Kevin thought as he resisted the urge to smile at her expression. I feel like you're thinking of something that would make me extremely annoyed. Exclamation point. Opening his eyes wide, Kevin turned his head to the side and pretended to have not heard anything. So you were. Don't know what you're talking about. Kevin's outward expression was calm and expressionless, but on the inside, Kevin felt a storm of thoughts and emotions. How in the world is she able to read my mind? Is this what they call a woman's intuition? Terrifying. Narrowing her eyes and scrutinizing Kevin, who tried his best to maintain his poker face, Emma shook her head and opened a huge door that led to the outside. I'll let this one go, now follow me. Led by Emma, Kevin exited the building and strolled around the academy campus. Wow, this is a lot busier than I expected. An ocean of students was swarming the campus as they each made their way towards the elective fair. Some were leisurely strolling around the campus with their friends, some were sitting in the patches of green around the campus, and others were frantically rushing towards the stalls in the elective fair. If it weren't for the fact that for some odd reason some of the students were going out of their way to step away from their path, reaching the location where the elective fair was being held was not going to be as unobstructed as it was now. Where exactly are we going? Section B. Pausing slightly, Kevin's eyes widened a little bit. Section B? Isn't that the professor area? It's precisely because it's the professor area that the elective fair is taking place there. Dumbfounded by her response, Kevin looked at Emma in confusion. How does that make sense? Rolling her eyes, Emma continued walking forward, ignoring Kevin, who was dumbly staring at her. Finally, after seeing that Kevin still had not understood, Emma sighed and spoke. Didn't I mention before about the deeper meaning behind electives? Nodding his head, Kevin replied, right, but how does that relate to the fact that the fair is in Section B? Because professors are also part of a faction. Halting his steps, Kevin took a moment to process what Emma had said. If what Emma had said was true, then choosing an elective was a far more serious matter than he had originally thought. If even the professors were trying to influence the elective fair, then it meant that the hidden politics in the academy were rooted deeper than he had previously thought. Although professors are technically no longer part of a faction, that still did not mean that they couldn't indirectly help the faction that they used to be a part of. Though they may no longer be a part of a faction, their loyalty is still there. If they wanted to, they could force students to join their faction by abusing their authority and make their lives harder. Seeing how Kevin's complexion was becoming grimmer by the second, Emma realized her mistake and tried to encourage him. But you don't need to worry about that. Although you're extremely sought after, they won't carelessly try to force you to join a faction as you are protected by the school. Moreover, you have me, Amanda, Melissa, and that guy protecting you. No professor would dare to mess with you with our backing. Seeing how she was frantically coming up with excuses to make him feel better, Kevin felt warm in his heart. Having spent most of his life in solitude, having friends that supported him and helped him in times of trouble was a new feeling for him. He couldn't say he disliked it. Thank you. For what? Taken aback by Kevin's strange attitude, Emma took a step back. You're not falling for me, right? I'm sorry, but I don't plan on dating right now. There goes all the goodwill he had for her. Hey, what's with that disgusted face? I was just joking. But still, the fact you are looking at a beauty like me with that kind of face irritates me. Narcissistic, aren't we? No, I'm just acknowledging the truth. Dumbfounded by her fast response, Kevin was momentarily left speechless as he did not know how to respond to her. Ignoring Kevin, who was too speechless to talk, Emma continued. My beauty aside, you still have to be careful when interacting with the professors, as although they can't touch you, they can still indirectly try to make your life harder if they hold a grudge against you. GHHH, why does everything have to be so annoying? Actually, now that I think about it, a few professors already hold a grudge against you. What? How? What did I do? What didn't you do? I mean, you suddenly showed up out of nowhere and bulldozed your way to the first rank. You pretty much humiliated those that believed that bloodlines or backing was the most important factor in being the best. Your existence alone is an eyesore for them. Of course, they built a grudge against you. Letting out a pained groan, Kevin couldn't help but curse at his own stupidity. The only reason why he tried his best for the test was that he had still not figured out that he was strong. Having been living isolated from society since the death of his parents, he didn't know that with the skills that he had developed thanks to the cheat-like system, he could have been considered as one of the bests of his generation. He had thought that since some of the rich second-generation kids had access to top-end facilities, they would have surely been stronger than him. But he had severely underestimated how much of a cheat the system was. Not only did it provide Kevin with the best training regime, but it also rewarded him with top-end skills, stats increase, and artifacts at the completion of each mission. By the time that admissions for the lock were open, he had already grown to be a prodigy. Had he known this fact, he wouldn't have tried as hard as he did during the examination. I mean, since coming to the lock, Kevin had been through many annoying situations where his rank 1 status had drawn too much unwanted attention. If only he had known. Seeing how distressed Kevin was, Emma, who took pity on him, decided to change the topic to relieve his mind from the troublesome problems. The sky is nice and blue, right? Excuse me? The clouds sure are fluffy. Are you okay? Never been better. How about you? What about me? I'm more worried about you, who is being weird. Back to your normal self? Finally realizing Emma's intention, Kevin blushed in embarrassment as he thanked her. Thank you. No probs, just don't think about all that annoying stuff. At worst you'll just have some minor troubles. You may have not realized it yet, but that number 1 rank is as much of a burden as it is a shield. With it, you don't have to worry about people openly doing something to you, and in fact, even if you haven't noticed it yet, you are constantly under the protection of the academy. The number 1 rank is not just a title, it's a representation of hope, a light that shines down this God-forsaken world, and guide us to true freedom. Looking at Kevin straight in his eyes, Emma lightly punched his shoulder as she flashed a stunning smile. So instead of worrying, be proud of what you've accomplished and destroy anything that dares obstruct your path to success. Chapter 37, Elective 3. Wow, there's a lot more people than I had originally thought. I'd have to agree with you on that one. As Kevin and Emma arrived outside of Section B, a crowd of students was swarming the entrance, making it hard to see what was ahead. Each student was sporting a different colored uniform which ranged from azure blue, dark green, and blood red, representing the year they were in. A 3-meter-tall wall surrounded the whole of Section B, and on top of the wall, an invisible high-voltage electrical line was installed, preventing anyone from trying to sneak into the compound. In order to enter the compound, 4 gates which were respectively allocated according to the cardinal points, north, south, east, west, were tightly guarded by the staff hired by the academy. Because the academy was mainly a medium to nurture talented individuals which would later be the future pillars of humanity, the information regarding the students was tightly secured by the academy. If the information were to be passed to the wrong hands, potentially talented heroes that have shown good promise during their academic stay might become the target of demons and villains, which could result in them prematurely dying before their talent could leave an impact on society. This was exactly what the academy didn't want, and hence why they invested heavily in security for Section B, excluding the professors who were all respectively strong heroes. The security alone comprised of B and C ranked heroes. Section B was practically one of the safest areas within the academy. After 10 minutes, Emma and Kevin were finally able to arrive at the entrance of the compound. The lines were split into 3, and at the end of each line, a student with a red blazer was handing leaflets to every person who entered the compound. "Welcome to the elective fair." Approaching Kevin and Emma, a blonde individual elegantly handed them a leaflet with a gentle yet confident smile on his face. "Thank you. Thank you." Without thinking much, Emma and Kevin took the leaflet and left, resulting in the blonde individual's smile to momentarily falter. Excuse me, freshman." Quickly regaining his composure, the blonde individual hastily moved in front of Kevin and Emma, obstructing their path. Suddenly being blocked out of nowhere, both Kevin and Emma couldn't help but frown as they scrutinized the person before them. Although he wasn't as handsome as Kevin, he could have been regarded as a fairly handsome individual with his relatively well-proportioned features, blue eyes, and confident demeanor. "What do you need?" Annoyed, Emma didn't try to hide her displeasure as she lightly glared in his direction. Smiling amiably, taking no notice of Emma's attitude, the blonde individual couldn't help but take a couple of glances at Emma, evidently stunned by her beauty. Without even acknowledging nor glancing in Kevin's direction, the blonde individual focused his whole attention on Emma, almost as if he was enchanted by her beauty. "Let me introduce myself. My name is Fabian Parker, 3rd year, ranked 14. May I have the honor of knowing this beautiful girl's name?" As he introduced himself, the undisguised pride in his tone couldn't be concealed as his smile deepened and his back straightened. His eyes, which now fully focused on Emma, couldn't hide the desire masked within them as he took one step closer to her. "That's enough." Placing his hand in front of Emma, blocking Fabian from approaching her, Kevin glared at him. "Can't you see you're bothering her? Who are you?" Finally noticing Kevin's presence, Fabian couldn't hide his displeasure, as his head snapped in his direction. "How dare you block this one's path? You're being annoying. Quickly move out of my way or don't blame me for being impolite." Frowning, just as Kevin was about to get angry, a mocking voice disrupted their confrontation as Emma walked in front of Kevin. "If you don't fuck off from my sight, don't blame me for being rude." Imitating Fabian's tone, Emma arrived right in front of Fabian and lightly smiled. Startled by Emma's outburst, Fabian couldn't find any words to say, resulting in his face crumping up. "Got nothing to say?" Raising her brow, Emma looked at Fabian provocatively. "You dare?" Trembling, Fabian pointed his finger in Emma's direction as he struggled to contain his anger. Since coming to the academy, no, more precisely, his whole life, Fabian had never been this humiliated. Being born from the prestigious Parker family, which held a tremendous amount of wealth and influence, every girl who he had ever approached threw themselves at him. Never in his 19 years of life did someone disrespect him so much. Especially from a couple of first years. Apart from those who were higher ranked than him, and had a similar amount of influence as his family, no one had the right to look down on him. He, Fabian Parker, heir of the Parker conglomerate with a net worth of over $1 trillion, was actually being humiliated in front of everybody like this? Does this slut think that just because she's pretty she can mess with me? It seems like you don't hold your seniors in regard. Good, good. Clapping his hands a couple of times, Fabian's face darkened and his previous gentlemanly demeanor completely vanished. Covering her mouth, Emma exaggeratedly looked at Fabian and exclaimed, "I am sorry. I didn't realize you were a senior. I mean..." Looking at Fabian up and down, Emma shook her head. "The way you talked made me think you were a spoiled brat, so I instantly assumed you were the same year as me. She's definitely enjoying this." Watching Emma, who acted like she was wronged, Kevin couldn't help but bitterly smile. What a drama queen. She could have just ignored him and told him who she was, as her background was enough of a deterrence for 99% of the people attending the academy, but she chose not to, meaning that she was trying to humiliate him publicly. Looking around, Kevin noticed a small crowd that had already started gathering around them due to Emma's loud voice. Sighing, Kevin started doubting whether asking Emma to help him was the right decision. Noticing the crowd that had started gathering around them, Fabian, who was on the verge of exploding, forcefully suppressed his anger and alternatively looked at Emma and Kevin. "It seems like the new first years are in need of disciplining, huh?" Vam. As soon as he finished his sentence, massive pressure engulfed the surroundings while blue light started emanating from Fabian's body. GHH. Ugh. What's going on? The crowd, which had gathered due to the commotion, suddenly felt an immense pressure bearing down on them, and because they were caught off guard due to the suddenness of the attack, most of the people found themselves sprawled on the floor struggling to move. Kevin and Emma, who were the ones that were bearing the full grunt of the force, took a knee to the ground as their legs gave out due to the immense pressure they were facing. Although both Kevin and Emma were extremely talented, they were in no way a match to a third-year student who had been vigorously training for 3 years under the care of the academy. Even Kevin, who could have been regarded as one of the best even amongst the second years, felt an unimaginable pressure bearing down on him. Detecting hostile force. Would you like to activate skill overdrive? Y/N. N no. Dismissing the system message that appeared anytime a hostile force was detected, Kevin looked up at Fabian, who was slowly walking towards Emma. "Not so proud now, huh? PFFTT, you don't know who you're messing with." "Oh. And how so?" Raising his brow, Fabian knelt down at Emma's eye level and lightly held her chin up with his fingers. Feeling Fabian's finger touching her chin, Emma momentarily froze before opening her eyes wide in disbelief. "I give you 3 seconds to let go of me before things get really serious." "Oh." Tilting his head, Fabian couldn't help but lightly chuckle as his hand gripped Emma's cheeks. "Do tell me what you're going to do to me." "How dare you!" Feeling Fabian's hand gripping onto her face, Emma's final restraint disappeared, and just when she was about to call her guards, a powerful voice reverberated across the surroundings. "Stop!" Right after the shout, the pressure that was bearing down on everyone disappeared, and a tall individual whose skin was on the darker side appeared before the crowd. He had braids that extended all the way to his shoulders, and his bulging muscles that were the size of a football made one wonder if he was a human. "Stop this farce at once!" Arriving in front of Fabian, the individual who seemed to be the instructor overlooking this area appeared before Fabian and loudly screamed at his face. "WH-at!" Feeling the spit that was being spewed on his face by the instructor as he shouted, Fabian, who couldn't believe his eyes, struggled to speak for a couple of seconds. Actually, he knew this individual. Hero rank 459 Jerome Wilson, aka Diamond Destroyer, a rather well-known hero famed for his tremendous strength. His name, Diamond Destroyer, stemmed from how he was able to crush diamonds with his bare hands. If not for his low agility, Jerome could have been ranked in the top 300. Noticing that he was being scolded by instructor Jerome, Fabian was so shocked that he couldn't utter a single word. The reason he was shocked was not because he was being scolded, but rather by whom he was being scolded. Diamond Destroyer, who he had known since young, was actually supposed to be an individual planted by his family to secretly support him during his stay in the academy. Yet here he was berating him in front of everyone. "Come to my office right now." Without leaving any time for Fabian to collect himself, Jerome grabbed him by the neck and immediately left without even looking at Kevin and Emma. Looking at the instructor who hastily brought Fabian away, Kevin stood up. Had he been a split second slower, Kevin would have been forced to take action. "Are you all right?" Extending his hand towards Emma to help her stand up, Kevin had a troubled look on his face as he looked at the people around him groaning in pain on the floor. Without responding to Kevin, Emma emotionlessly walked towards the entrance. Reading the mood, Kevin shut up and followed her. "It seems like a storm was brewing. Release me at once." After finding a relatively secluded area, Jerome, who was still holding on to Fabian, who was flaying in his arms, finally let go of him. "Kuh, how dare you do this me?" Holding on to his neck, Fabian glared at Jerome, who had a tired look on his face. "How dare you lay your filthy hands on me? Wait till I tell D. Young master," shouted Jerome as veins could be seen visibly bulging from his head. Stopping abruptly, Fabian looked at Jerome in disbelief, as never in his whole life did he see him ever lose his cool like this. Sorry. Realizing what he had just done, Jerome let out a long sigh and apologized to Fabian. Covering his face, Jerome took out his phone and quickly dialed a number. "Young master, you have seriously screwed up this time. Hat?" Noticing that things weren't right, Fabian's voice became slightly rushed as he looked at Jerome, who was pacing back and forth in front of him. "Hello." Finally, after a couple of seconds, a cold voice full of authority entered Jerome's ears. "Master, there's been an emergency." "What happened?" "It's regarding young master." "What did he do?" A conflict between him and the Rochefield child occurred during the elective fair, and judging from how they operate, things might become difficult very soon. "Bring that child home, I'll handle the rest." Pausing for a moment, the voice behind the phone became slightly colder before giving one last command and hanging up. Click. R.R. Rochefield. Staring at Jerome in disbelief, Fabian looked as if he had lost his soul. Never in a million years did he imagine that the child he was eyeing was actually the princess of the Rochefield clan, and whose father was the vice director of the union. No wonder she was so arrogant. No wonder she didn't even flinch at the mention of his family's name. Although her family was about the same strength as his family, because her father worked in the union, if he wanted to, he could immediately make things harder for the Parker family, resulting in 7 to 8 digits losses. Realizing what he had done, Fabian powerlessly slumped on the ground as he dazedly looked at the sky. I fucked up big time. Chapter 38, Elective 4. Are you sure you're all right? Passing by stalls without even glancing at them, Kevin worriedly looked at Emma, who remained silent throughout the whole time they were walking. After that accident, Emma had a gloomy air around her. It felt as if she had erected a tall barrier that prevented anyone from approaching her. Hey! Hey! Suddenly Emma stopped walking. Raising her hand slightly, she wiped away the corner of her mouth. Looking down, her azure blue uniform now had a small red stain on it. Noticing it, Emma quickly pulled her hand back to hide the small stain. But although Emma tried to be subtle with her actions, it couldn't escape Kevin's eyes, which immediately widened in shock. Shh! *T. Grabbing her hand, Kevin immediately dragged her out of the elective fair. It seemed like the earlier confrontation had resulted in Emma sustaining some internal injuries. The fact that she refused to kneel even under all of that pressure goes to show how much willpower and determination she had. Fabian's rank was most likely around the C range, which was around 2 ranks higher than Emma, whose rank was still E, borderline E rank. Subjected to such pressure, Emma was bound to suffer internal injuries. If not for the fact that Kevin's rank was E plus borderline D rank, he too would have suffered serious internal injuries. Smack! Don't touch me! Raising her voice, Emma smacked Kevin's hand away. A split second after realizing what she had done, Emma froze and lowered her head in shame. I am sorry. It's all right. Not taking it to heart, Kevin stopped and looked at Emma. Her complexion had become a lot paler than before, and looking at her carefully now, Kevin could see Emma slightly shivering. Almost as if she was suffering from extreme cold. Shh! *T, how come I didn't notice this before? Cursing at himself, Kevin thought for a bit before gritting his teeth. Here. Taking out a light green potion from his inventory, Kevin handed it to Emma. This potion was one of the rewards that he had gotten after completing a quest that the system had given him. He had saved it in case he got severely hurt, but seeing Emma suffering, Kevin couldn't control his impulse and decided to give it to her. In the first place, the only reason she got hurt was because of him. If he had not asked her to bring him around for the elective fair, none of this would have happened. I appreciate your concern. Looking at the potion Kevin had given her, Emma was slightly touched, but she still rejected it. I insist. Noticing Emma's stubbornness, Kevin tried to forcefully put the potion in her hand, only to be rejected by her once again. Seeing that he could do nothing to make her take the potion, Kevin gave up. Her hand, which was slightly trembling, reached out for her pocket. Taking out her phone, she quickly dialed a number. After a couple of rings, a pleasant and gentle voice could be heard from the other side of the phone. Young miss, how may I help you? I need someone to pick me up. Is something wrong, miss? Everything is fine, please come and pick me up. As you wish, young miss, I will immediately dispatch someone to pick you up. Sensing something, the lady on the other side of the phone immediately called for someone to go to Emma's location. Tack! Soon after hanging up her phone, a butler calmly walked in their direction. He donned a neat black blazer with a slight opening where his white unwrinkled shirt could be seen. A black bow tie hugged his neck and accompanied by his well-polished shoes that shined under the campus light, further added to his elegance. He had a full set of white hair which was a result of his age. At the edge of his eyes, which were obsidian black, wrinkles that extended all the way to his upper cheeks could be seen. Lastly, what stood out the most about him was his nicely trimmed mustache that rested below his nose. Young miss. Elegantly bowing in front of Emma, the butler greeted Emma. Uncle Norman, please bring me home. Noticing that something wasn't right, Norman looked up and saw Emma's pale face. Miss. Rushing in to support her, Norman grabbed her shoulders in a panic. I'm FIKHHH. Seeing the panic in Norman's eyes, Emma tried to brush it off, but as soon as she started speaking, a red trail of blood fell from her nose. Soon she passed out in Norman's arms. Miss. Lightly shaking Emma's body, Norman looked around in panic. Taking out his phone, he quickly called for backup. After he finished calling for backup, he gently laid Emma on a bench. After making sure that Emma was okay, Norman's demeanor completely changed as he coldly looked at Kevin and asked, "Tell me what happened." Helplessly nodding his head, Kevin quickly recounted what had happened moments before. As he listened attentively to Kevin recounting about the incident with Fabian, Norman's face became gloomier by the second. The Parkers, good. Standing up, an extremely strong bloodlust permeated the surrounding, suffocating Kevin. Fortunately, Norman was controlling his bloodlust as it could only be felt within a certain radius. If one of those weaker students were to suddenly be exposed to this bloodlust, they would have suffered mental trauma. Soon, 2 black cars arrived at the front of Section B where a bunch of individuals with black suits came out. Forming a line, they pushed away all students that were trying to take a look at what happened. Carrying Emma in his arms, Norman looked back at Kevin and said, "Tell the dorm supervisor that Emma will be absent for at least a couple of days." Nodding his head helplessly, Kevin agreed. Clank! Closing the door to the cars soon sped into the distance. Staring at the departing cars, Kevin fell into deep thought before going back into the dorm. It seems like he'll have to visit the elective fair another time. Parker Tower, Ashton City. It was currently nighttime in Ashton City, and the lights coming from the cars drifting in the distance formed beautiful yellow and red stripes that stretched all the way to the horizon. Inside of a large office, on the top floor of a tall glass building, the silhouette of a man looking down the busy streets of Ashton City could be seen. That is all. Standing a few steps behind the man, a butler kneeled on the floor as he read the report in his hand. After the butler read the report, a deathly silence permeated the room. Soon the silence was disrupted by the cold voice of the silhouette standing by the window side of the office. "Push the plan forward." "Sir." Abruptly standing up, the butler immediately tried to voice his objection. Huck. But before he could do that, the butler found himself facing the ground as an unimaginable pressure bore down on him. No matter how much he struggled, he could not move. This was especially shocking since the butler himself was a B-rank hero. The fact that he could not move despite his high rank goes to show how powerful the individual he was serving was. "Do as you're told." Without looking back, the silhouette once again spoke. This time, the butler didn't even dare to talk back as he could only nod his head on the floor. Soon the pressure died down and the butler was able to regain his mobility. "Call him to my room." As the butler was ready to leave the room, his master spoke once again. "Yes, master." Clank! Elegantly bowing his body forward, the butler left the office. Soon, the office became enveloped in silence as only the sound of the man's breathing could be heard. Knock! Knock! Father? The tranquil atmosphere was soon broken by the sound of a knock. The door slowly opened and a face could be seen peeking from the other side of the door. Fabian, who was on the other side of the door, trembled all over as he waited for his father's permission to enter the room. His previous arrogance could no longer be seen as he resembled a scared rabbit trapped in a cage. "Enter." Clank! Obediently listening to his father, Fabian carefully entered the room and closed the door behind him. Soon an awkward silence enveloped the room. Sweat could be seen falling from Fabian's face as he stood with his back straight, not daring to sit down. Unable to stand the tense atmosphere anymore, Fabian was the first to break the silence. Father? Turning around, the features of the silhouette were revealed under the room's lights. His facial features were similar to that of Fabian, however, despite his age, which was in the late 50s, there were no wrinkles on his face. If someone did not know about his age, they could have easily mistaken him for a 20-year-old college student. What separated him from a regular student was his distinct sense of authority that could be felt from his demeanor. It felt as if he was a judge that dictated who was guilty and who was innocent. Gulp! Swallowing a large mouthful of saliva, Fabian waited for his father to respond. "How do you plan to fix your mistake?" "Why, yes." Hearing his dad's cold voice, Fabian stood up straight and fumbled on his words. He was too nervous to speak. Frankly, Fabian since young had rarely ever spoken with his father. He was the third in line of the Parker family, and wasn't doted on as much as his brothers. However, he still had everything. His family, which was passed on for generations, could be considered as one of the strongest in the current human domain. They managed to rise from the bottom to where they were now thanks to their business-orientated mentality. The Parker conglomerate was responsible for selling and trading cores, monster parts, and skills. They had so much money that could last each member for generations. Being neglected, Fabian spent lavishly to substitute the missing paternal love that he never received from his parents. On the off chance that he did meet his father, he would always be intimidated by his presence, which exuded authority. To him, his father never felt like a real father, he felt more like his boss. "I want you to finish what you started." Seeing that his son was still too timid to hold a conversation with him, Michael Parker, the current CEO of the Parker conglomerate, spoke up. Not expecting what his father was telling him, Fabian looked at his father in confusion. "You heard me clear, I want you to finish what you started." But why didn't that start conflict with the Rochefield family? Smirking coldly, Michael Parker looked at his son in contempt. "The deed has already been done, you think they'll do nothing after what you've done?" Hearing his father's words, Fabian lowered his head. He was right, now that everything had already started it was too late to regret it. "I've been planning this for a while, you've only pushed forward the inevitable. So now I want you to go through with it to the end, I want you to thoroughly crush Emma Rochefield." Staring at his son, Michael Parker slowly walked next to him and patted his shoulder. "Prove your worth." Feeling his father's large hands, Fabian felt something inside of him rise. It was something that he had never felt before, reliance? As if a fire had suddenly ignited inside of his heart, Fabian looked at his father in the eyes and asked. "But if I target her, wouldn't that make me the prime target of the Rochefield?" Smiling slightly, Michael turned back to look at the busy streets of Ashton City. "You have to mask your actions, hire some people to create conflict within the academy so that you can veil your true target. Emma Rochefield. Once everyone is too distracted with the conflicts, you will strike and deal a fatal blow to the Rochefield family's only successor." Staring at the busy streets of Ashton City, Michael Parker grinned coldly. Looking at the Rochefield Tower not so far in the distance, Michael Parker raised his hand and slowly clenched it. It's about time that the Parker family got rid of the Rochefield family. Chapter 39, Elective 5. Inside of a large room decorated in pink, with a large king-sized bed in the middle, laid a stunning young girl with short brown hair that scattered all over her pillow. She was currently lying down beneath a set of thin blankets that could not hide the outlines of her body. Sitting next to her, a tall man with similar colored hair, nervously looked at the young girl who was resting on the bed. Her skin, which was flawless, was currently pale, and if not for the fact that her breathing was stable, someone could have easily mistaken her for a dying patient. At that moment, Emma opened her eyes. Oliver Rochefield, Emma's father and the man that was in the room, noticing Emma's eyes opening, immediately shot up and called for a doctor. "You're up. How are you holding up?" "Fine." Emma sat up on the bed and bitterly smiled at her father's worried expression. Soon a doctor came running in to check her pulse, but Emma pushed him away with a smile. "It's fine, Dad. Nothing serious happened." "Really?" "Of course. Do I look like someone who would get injured so easily? Plus, didn't the doctor already confirm I was fine?" I did." Hearing Emma mention him, the doctor lightly shuddered and hurriedly nodded. Oliver Rochefield was a powerful figure who had many titles to his name. Flame Overlord Oliver Rochefield, 89th in the hero ranking, Ashton City Mayor and Vice Director of the Union. Each title more fearsome than the other. The doctor knew that being on this man's bad side would only make his life more difficult. Looking at his daughter up and down a couple of more times, Oliver eventually relented and gestured for the doctor to leave. She seems fine, so you can go now. Yes, sir. The doctor, without skipping a beat, hurriedly ran out of the room. Looking at the closing door, Emma spoke briefly. Dad. Oliver Rushfield replied with a gentle tone. About the Parkers. Before Emma could finish speaking, the room's temperature increased dramatically. Dad? Noticing the changes happening around her, Emma quickly tried to stop her father. Dad, stop. Placing her hands on her father's cheeks, Emma tried her best to calm her father down. Despite being one of the strongest people in the human domain, Oliver Rushfield had one fatal weakness. His daughter. Ever since his wife's death 8 years ago, the only memento he had of his late wife was his daughter, Emma. Even though he was busy with his job, he always made sure to find enough time to spend it with his daughter. He doted on her a lot. Seeing her in this state, rage clouded Oliver's mind as he couldn't help but feel a stinging sensation hit his heart. It was only after he felt his daughter's warm, soft hands that his rage slowly started showing signs of subsiding. Dad, please stop. Hoo. Letting out a long breath, the room temperature returned to normal and Oliver bitterly smiled at his daughter. Only she could stop him from going on a rampage. Finally calming her dad down, Emma smiled in relief and slumped back into her bed. Sweetie, are you sure you're okay? I'm okay, I just need some rest. Okay, please don't push yourself. Tucking Emma in, Oliver stood up and prepared to leave. But just as he was about to leave, he felt a slight tug at the edge of his pants. Dad, you still didn't answer my previous question. Sigh, Emma, this matter is more serious than you think. Gently sitting on the bed next to Emma, Oliver slowly caressed her head. What do you mean? The Parkers have been eyeing our properties and resources for a long time now. If before they were reluctant to act because of my position, now that they know I will retaliate because of what happened, they will no longer have any restraints when dealing with us. Pausing slightly, Oliver held his daughter's soft hand tightly and said, So sweetie, rest well and return to the academy once you're fully healed. The academy is the safest place for you to be at the moment. Frowning for a bit, Emma looked at her father. His eyes, which held boundless love for her, were seeded with worry. Seeing this warmth filled her heart as she felt how much he worried about her. Tightening her grip of her father's large hand, Emma's frown lessened and she nodded. I understand. Smiling gently, Oliver gently kissed Emma on the cheek and left the room. As soon as Oliver left the room, his gentle demeanor completely vanished, and what replaced it was a cold and indifferent one. Norman. Yes, master. Turning his head towards Norman, who was patiently standing outside of Emma's room, Oliver instantly issued orders. Start liquidating all our unnecessary assets. I want 1 billion gathered by the end of the week. As you wish. Bowing down, Norman lightly smiled and left, leaving Oliver standing outside of Emma's door. Having known his master for a while, Norman knew exactly what he was planning. Normally, he would have been against it as the consequences of a war against powerhouses was unimaginable, but thinking back at what had happened to Emma, his eyes narrowed and his pace increased. She was the Rushfield reverse scale. Seeing that Norman left, Oliver sighed and looked at his daughter's room. Gently caressing the door to Emma's room, Oliver turned around and silently spoke. If I don't deal substantial damage to the Parkers by the end of this, then I shall not be called Oliver Rushfield. Though his voice was quiet, it held boundless rage within it. Equals. Closing the book down, I lightly sighed. It seemed like things were going to get difficult from here on out. A lot has happened since my near-death experience. In about a week's time, Tobias Church will be assassinated. Since my life and death moment in the dungeon, I increased my training time from 5 hours a day to 9 hours a day. Whenever I had free time on my hands, I would train. It was only after I almost died that I realized that life was as fickle as it could be. Just a single moment and I could die. Only if I was stronger would I be able to live. Unbeknownst to me, my outlook on life had slowly started to change. I used to think that all I had to do was train and slowly follow along with the storyline. I had this babysitter type of mindset. Just follow the protagonist and cover for them if anything that was beyond the plotline happened. Those were my ambitions. Nothing else. But the further I stayed in this world, the more I realized that there was more to this world than just a story. The people, the beautiful sceneries, the professors, my classmates, everything around me was real. This was no longer a novel, and there were no second chances. If I learned something since reincarnating inside of my own novel was that I needed power. In the first place. If I had power, I wouldn't need to babysit the plotline. No, if I was stronger, then nothing could stop me from achieving what I wanted. Be it the protagonists, the Union, the Demon King, if I was stronger then no one could stop me from living the life that I desired. Though I still didn't plan on interfering with the main storyline, my previous ambition of just babysitting the protagonists was no longer there. I need to think more about myself than them. Did I want to go through another near-death experience again? No, I didn't. The feeling of having your life toyed with wasn't something I would want to go through again. No longer did I want to be chained by someone else. I wanted something for myself, and only through power could I achieve that. I may choose to remain low-key for now so that I could build power without getting into any unnecessary conflicts, but the day that I decided to expose my power to the world will be the day that the demons will shake at the mere mention of my name, Rendover. And in order to achieve this, I decided to remove every distraction around me. Soon I started training like crazy. Every day I would wake up early, go to the gym, take classes, eat, go to the gym and repeat. A thing that has become bothersome though was that the gym had started becoming fuller as the days went by. Moreover, the atmosphere in the gym was not right. About 2 weeks had passed since the events of the elective fair. And a tense atmosphere enveloped the whole academy, as the first, second, and third years started eyeing each other. This was mainly organized by Fabian, who hired people to start conflicts with the first years. In the first week, things weren't that bad as only small conflicts happened. However, past the first week, entering the second week, the conflicts started escalating to a whole new level. It first started when a second year beat up a first year for bumping into him. Soon, some of the enraged first years took it upon themselves to teach a lesson to the person responsible for the incident. A day after the first year was hospitalized, 3 second years were sent to the hospital heavily injured, including the one that hurt the first year who was the one that had the heaviest injuries. Following that, the conflicts started escalating more and more. It had gotten so bad that the teachers could no longer turn a blind eye on the situation and firmly stated that whoever was caught fighting within the academy would be expelled. With no exception. Regardless of rank or family background. Thanks to this announcement, the conflicts within the academy died down. Keyword: within. This meant that once you stepped outside the academy boundary, it was free for all. Fortunately for me, I didn't really have anything to do outside of the academy, so I was fairly unaffected by this whole conflict. Moreover, since my rank was low, I was treated like crap regardless of whether they were juniors or seniors. No discrimination there. Another major thing that had happened was that the Parkers and the Rochefield had finally started acting against each other. The stock prices of each company fluctuated every day as businesses owned by both parties started going bankrupt left and right. It was total chaos. The conflicts were starting to escalate and soon will reach all the way to the academy. I wasn't sure how to feel about this. The atmosphere around the academy was so tense that it started affecting my training. Fortunately, because of my low-profile nature, I was still in the clear, for now. Click! Closing the door to my dorm, I walked towards my elective of food exploration. Yup, just like the name suggested, the elective I chose was an elective that focused on food. But don't get me wrong, this wasn't my first choice. In fact, it was probably one of my last choices. But because of all the conflicts within the academy where seniors would reject first years added with the multiple rejections I got due to my rank, I was left with no choice but to apply for this elective. An elective that mainly focused on food. Well, it wasn't that simple, but it was along that line. What made things worse was that this elective was the elective that Amanda took. By some sort of weird twist of fate, I ended up in the same elective as one of the main protagonists that I wanted to avoid. At this point, I was starting to doubt whether my plan to remain low-key would even be achieved, as I was constantly being put through situations where I would either interact with the main cast or fight against mid-novel bosses. Like seriously, what was wrong with this world? I was literally going through more hardship than the protagonist himself. Chapter 40, Changes Happening in the Academy, 1. The elective was in room B17. When I entered, the rows of the classroom were already filled with students, most of which were wearing a familiar azure blue blazer. There were about 40 first years, of which 32 of them were girls. The reason for such disparity in gender probably had to do with the class president's bewitching appearance. After glancing at the room for a couple of seconds, I turned towards Amanda's direction and sat a few seats behind her. All the front row seats had been taken by the girls. Sitting down, I could smell a nice rose-like scent coming from her direction, promoting my nose to greedily take in the smell. After being exposed to this scent for 5 minutes, an elegant young man, with nicely combed hair, entered the classroom. He had a gentle smile on his face, and his looks could have been considered to be on the higher end of the spectrum. The club president finally showed up. Arriving in front of the podium, the young man calmly placed his stuff down and looked at all the students that had come. Smiling, he said, "Nice to meet you. I'm Elijah Turner. I am very pleased by your participation in our elective, food exploration." Elijah Turner, the current president of the elective and a third year. As he smiled, apart from Amanda, all the girls' faces flushed red in excitement. Rolling my eyes, I rested my head on my right arm and carefully looked at Elijah. Though the class may be ignorant about his true nature, I wasn't. Elijah Turner was a villain and Professor Tebow's second in command. Soon, several incidents would happen in the academy, including an incident involving Amanda. Elijah would be the mastermind behind it. Of course, I had no reason to make trouble for myself by shouting, "This guy is a villain," alongside Professor Tebow. They'd probably glare at me and kick me out of the club. Wasn't worth the effort. In any case, Elijah had made a pact with a demon that was part of the Charm Clan, a sub-branch of the demon clan of Lust. In exchange for selling his soul to the demon, he obtained his current appearance and an ability called Bewitchment, which was very similar to Donna's enchantment art. The only difference was that it only worked on females, whilst Donna's worked for anyone regardless of gender or race. Currently, his main goal should be Amanda. Being such a talented individual, alongside her impressive background, the demons highly coveted her. That was part of the reason why his contractor was a high-ranking demon within the Charm Clan, despite his talent being on the lower side. Since today is the first day, I'll do a brief introduction about myself and what the club consists of. His charming voice drifted across the classroom, pleasantly entering everyone's ears like it was a beautiful note from a fine-tuned instrument. Instantly the eyes of the female students started shining even brighter. In food exploration, we research and discuss monster and plant composition. We will look at which monsters and plants are edible, and how they benefit our bodies. The topics that we will cover in this course are monster identification, methods of cooking, poison extraction, what combinations were most optimal, and plant identification. It may sound boring and all, but don't worry, as that's just the boring part. Smiling brightly, Elijah looked at everyone in the class. As he was looking, his eyes slightly paused on Amanda, who was quietly listening to the lecture. Rolling my eyes, I scoffed at him. You think no one noticed you staring at Amanda? For the fun part, with the permission from the academy, we will be going to different places and taste amazing food. A wave of cheers instantly enveloped the class as the male students celebrated the fact that they were able to leave the academy, while the female students cheered for a different reason. Food exploration, as odd as it may sound, was one of the most sought-after courses for lower-end academies, as not only did it pay well, but it also didn't have as high of a risk compared to dungeon hunting. This was especially tempting for those who didn't have any combat talent, as despite lacking talent in combat, they could still be widely recognized and regarded by most people. The more famous chefs even had celebrity status that rivaled that of most S-ranked heroes. Walking towards the table that was neatly set up in front of the classroom, Elijah pulled his sleeve upwards. I'll show you guys a quick demonstration. Let's take a look at this steak. As I'm sure most of you know, this is the meat of a D-rank creature, man or horse. Tapping his ring twice, a large steak appeared on the table. The steak, which was the size of a wheel, had fine white threads of fat extending like a spiderweb all over the steak, reminding me of Wagyu steak. Just one look and it was enough for me to start salivating. Tapping on a button, a holographic image of a large horse popped up for everyone in the class to see. Just like its name suggested, the man-o-war horse was an evolved version of a horse. Having an enormous body that was as tall as 3 people, the man-o-war horse was an extremely strong D-rank monster. What made them troublesome was their ferocious and fearsome personalities that would cause them to attack anything at minimal provocation. As most of you probably know, the man-o-war horse is an extremely hard creature to kill, let alone capture. If not for the fact that after careful research and analysis we found its weakness, this steak's value would already be in the 5 digits. As Elijah talked, a sudden wave of tiredness swept over me. It mostly had to do with the fact that I was overworking myself these days, but it also had to do with the fact that I already knew the contents of the lecture. A yawn soon escaped from my mouth and the corners of my eyes teared up. The yawn, which was fairly loud, caused Elijah's eyebrows to slightly twitch. Soon every female in the class turned their heads in my direction and hatefully glared at me. It was like they were telling me, "How dare you interrupt our prince when he's speaking?" Honestly, I wouldn't even be surprised if they attacked me for real if I yawned one more time. The girls had fallen deep. Only Amanda kept her eyes on the hologram and ignored what was happening around her. Cough. Elijah let out a dry cough before continuing his explanation. Because of the food it consumes, which mainly consists of highly fatty food, the man-o-war horse's meat as seen here is highly marbleized. Ding! Dong! 50 minutes have passed since then, and finally, the loud sound of the bells signaling the end of the lectures rang. Standing up, I packed up my stuff and prepared to leave. This time I held my impulse to yawn as I didn't want to get attacked by Elijah's crazy fangirls. You never know how scary fangirls were. I was on my way to the door when I saw Elijah approaching Amanda. My feet soon stopped. Junior Amanda. Here, this is a small gift for entering the elective. Taking out a small black object from his pocket, Elijah handed it to Amanda. As I focused a lot on Kevin in the novel, I didn't really know what happened in between the events that led to the incident between Elijah and Amanda, so what he was doing now and what the black box was I had no clue. But I knew he was scheming something. Rather than that being just a gift for joining the elective, Elijah probably handed her something valuable just to strike a good impression with her. Yes, thank you. Amanda took the box and indifferently left the class. That seemed to be the end of their first encounter. Well, that was more anticlimactic than I expected. Was expecting something more entertaining, to be honest, but I guess Elijah was much more patient than I gave him credit for, as he just smiled as if nothing happened. Shaking my head, I walked out of the classroom. Well, not like I care anyways. All I cared about at the moment was getting stronger. As long as the plotline of the story didn't deviate too much from the main story, I couldn't care less about the minor details. Walking out of the classroom, I thought for a bit before deciding to go back to my dorm. I think I deserved a bit of rest. It wouldn't do me any good if I overworked myself. Click! Arriving in my dorm, I opened the door and entered. Pumph! Placing my keys on the wall hanger, I lazily slumped on the bed. Ding! Hearing the sound of a notification coming from my phone, I took my phone out and unlocked the screen. Class A25, A24, A23 announcement. Dear students, we will be going on an excursion 2 weeks from today. We will be going to Hallberg, and we will visit their famous monster processing plant. The trip will be approximately a week long and thus will require you to come prepared. Read more. Oof. Lazily throwing my phone on the bed, I couldn't help but feel a massive headache coming my way. 2 weeks from now our entire class will be going to Hallberg, a city 2 hours away from Ashton City. The goal of this trip was to let students see how monsters were processed and how they were used to create weapons and artifacts. It was a very useful class as it helped students understand some of the topics in class better. It was always easier to learn visually rather than theoretically. Too bad the trip was not as fun as it may seem on the surface. Just thinking about the future that awaits me, a long tired sigh escaped from my mouth as I used my arm to cover my eyes. Let's just hope that I won't have to expose myself. Though I said that, my hopes were low. The trip was definitely one that I would have to participate in even if I didn't want to. Normally, in my previous world, in order to skip school, I could have faked a sickness or something. But here, the technology was so advanced that pretending to be sick wouldn't work. With a simple check, the doctor could immediately tell if someone was lying or not. Let's hope for the best.